Welcome back to the art studio. It's me, Mrs. Lapka, and this week we're going to be focusing on culture and architecture. We're going to be looking at a tribe of people called the Ndebele who live in Zimbabwe, Africa, and we're going to be looking at the sort of houses that they make. Whenever I'm traveling from city to city or even from one country to another, one of the things that really strikes me, that inspires me, is all of the different kinds of architecture that we see in a different place. Now, architecture is the art of designing and constructing buildings, and there are all sorts of different buildings and structures that architects design and build. Many times the architecture that you might see in a particular neighborhood or a city or a state or even in a different country relates to or speaks to the culture in that area. Culture is like a way of life for a group of people. Usually it's a list or group of things that those people share in common, and culture can come about in a lot of different ways. It could be the food that people eat, the art that they make and enjoy, music, religion, and in this case it could be architecture, the types of homes that they live in. Now, the types of homes they live in might be a part of their identity and their culture, but also it might reflect their lifestyle. So somebody who lives in a yurt way out in the woods might be someone who really appreciates a culture of nature and sustainability, and someone who likes to be kind of isolated and on their own. So there are lots of different ways that people put their culture into their homes or their architecture. So we see some people, one of the cultures that I'm really interested in is van life, people who turn vans into RVs or mobile homes, and they tour around the world living in their vans, traveling around with a home on wheels. Doesn't that sound like fun? So this person's architecture actually is their van, and their culture or their lifestyle is reflected in the architecture that they live in. Some people in the American Southwest, and even people in the past, like the Pueblos, created homes, created architecture that was reflective of their environment, of the world, the natural world they lived in, and used natural elements from the land they lived on to build their homes, like using mud and water to create structures. Now, some of you might live in an urban area, in a city, and those architecture structures are going to look totally different from one that might be rural or far away from a town or city. For this project, we're going to travel really far away, and we're going to look at some architecture and talk a little bit about the culture of some people who live in Zimbabwe, which is actually a country in Africa. So Africa is a continent. It looks like this on a map you may have seen. It's a really huge, big place, and inside Africa, you have all these different countries that each have their own culture. Each country has its own music and art and food and history and a completely different government. So Africa is so rich in culture and has a really long history and so many interesting people and cultures to learn about. The one we're going to focus on for this project is actually a group of people called the Ndebele, and they live in Zimbabwe, which is this little purple country right here. So it's a landlocked country in southern Africa that has a lot of really cool culture, and we're going to talk about the architecture of this small tribe of people. Now, in Africa, we do have a lot of people who live out in the savannah or out in nature, almost like that yurt picture that I showed you earlier, but people who live far away from cities and live out in nature really far away, and they farm and live off of the land. Now, I know when I think about Africa, I'm an animal lover, so I'm always thinking about elephants and lions and giraffes, and that's fun, but it's also important to remember that in Africa, each one of these countries has really bustling urban areas. So this is the main capital city of Zimbabwe, and as you can see, it's a super busy, bustling city. So although we do have tribes of people who live really far out in rural places in Africa, there are still plenty of people who live in the suburbs and live in the city in Africa. So just like here in the United States, we have people who live all different sorts of cultures and lifestyles in all the different countries in Africa. In Zimbabwe, there is a tribe called the Ndebele, And the Ndebele tribe is a group of people that's been around for generations and generations, which means they have a really rich culture and history. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is how the Ndebele tribe uses color and culture in their architecture. So one of the first things that you would notice if you visited the landscape of the Ndebele tribe are their beautiful, beautiful homes. And the women in these tribes paint the outside of their houses with all these vibrant, beautiful colors. Another thing that you would notice about the Ndebele tribe right away is how their fashion and their beadwork are a part of their culture and a part of their visual aesthetic. So what I love about looking at pictures of the Ndebele tribe is all of the creative ways that they dress and adorn and decorate their bodies. Look at these beautiful, strong women and their colorful fashions. So the Ndebele tribe are known worldwide for their super colorful clothing and beadwork and jewelry. And we see that represented not only in their clothes, but also in the homes that they live in. So their culture is reflected in their architecture. So while there's countless things that we could learn about having to do with the Ndebele tribe's culture, for this project we're really just going to be looking at their architecture and focusing on their patterns, lines, and textures, and thinking about how we could make our own Ndebele house for this project. So the Ndebele houses are usually round, but not always, and they look a little bit like this. They have a thatched roof, and the walls and the roof and all the materials used to make it are natural materials that they source from the land around them. I think that's really cool. There's so much inspiration to be found in these structures and this architecture and all of the culture that they paint on the outside of it, and I want you to notice all of these beautiful patterns and the type of colors that the Ndebele women use when they're painting and designing their homes. Decorating your Ndebele house, it might be helpful to draw inspiration from the original artists. Now you could make your Ndebele house try to look as authentic or realistic as possible so that it looks like it's really made with Ndebele patterns and style in mind. However, you could draw inspiration from your own culture and your own life and decorate the outside of your Ndebele house in a way that reflects you. So as always, with all of my lessons, you do what inspires you and what gives you joy when you're making art. You do not have to follow all of the instructions that I'm doing here. Usually, when we're looking at the Ndebele houses, an Ndebele artist might choose maybe 5 or 6 colors that they repeat over and over again in their patterns, or they might have the same shapes that they're repeating over and over again in their artwork. One of the things that we also notice is that they have a lot of black and white outlines, and this is something that we can see in all of the Ndebele houses. No matter what lines or shapes or colors they're picking to repeat in their patterns, we always see this white and black motif. So let's go ahead and get started. For the first step of our Ndebele house, you're gonna need a really long piece of paper for the wall of our house. We'll be curling it around like this to create the body of our house or the main structure. And you're also gonna need a pencil. Now, if you don't have a long piece of paper like this, maybe you're working from home, you can take a regular piece of computer paper, fold it in half, and then cut it. All right, now the first thing we're gonna do on our Ndebele house, on this long piece of paper, you're gonna draw a door and 2 windows. Now, we're really focusing on shapes as a part of this project here, and so your door could be any shape that you want. there's my door and my window. And now we're gonna start designing our designs, or our colors, shapes, lines, patterns onto the surface of our Ndebele house. Now I'm gonna do two of these with you today. The first one is going to be a more simple option. So if you're looking for something a little bit more simple, we're going to do just a couple of stripes across the surface all the way across. And then inside each stripe, I'm going to repeat a pattern all the way across. So when we look at this one, we see there's two shapes or two patterns that are repeated back and forth. And on the bottom stripe here, we've got this zigzag triangle pattern that's repeated. Make sure to leave room for your white stripes and your black outlines if that's something you're interested in including. Okay, so now I've drawn out my pattern with pencil. Before you start drawing, I want to point out that online I have posted this pattern page. It's double-sided, or it might print out as two sheets. That's going to give you some inspiration to draw from. So you could always pause this video and take a look at these and zoom in on these, or you can print this out if you prefer working that way and use this as inspiration. For the second house I'm gonna do, this one is a little bit more complicated. So if you wanna do something a little bit denser or with a lot more design in it, you might go with this route. This one, I'm not gonna do two stripes. I'm gonna have some vertical and horizontal rectangles that all fit together like a puzzle, and in each one, it's gonna be like a panel, kind of like each one of these is a panel where I'm gonna do a design on the inside. Now this is gonna take a little bit more effort and a little bit more time, so this is definitely the advanced version of this. That doesn't mean that you can't do it. You absolutely can. It's just up to you what you feel like doing today. Alright, so now we've reached the end of our first step on our Ndebele house project. We have made our long piece of paper, and we drew in pencil all of our geometric designs, thinking about lines and shapes and color. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about, in step 2, coloring in our designs. I hope you guys had fun creating the first step of your Ndebele house today, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye, guys.